Today we welcome Harry Baya. Harry told me he has roots here. His mother's family goes back many generations, and he spent his early childhood here and returned when he retired from New York. He was in New York, and then he worked another 9 years here, he said, so double retirement. He said he was forced into an early retirement at 75. So today he speaks with us about the hero's journey, paradigm shift. Welcome, Harry.
Where's the goodie?
I can get this out of your way.
Set. You sit.
It's going to take me a minute to get organized, get all my little gadgets going. The first time I spoke here many years ago, they told me afterwards, don't you know you're supposed to limit it to 20 or 30 minutes, you know? You're not supposed to go an hour. And I said, nobody told me. They said, well, you've been coming here. Haven't you noticed? I said, I don't pay attention to things like that. So now I bring a timer and I start it and watch it, and it'll warn me when I'm getting near the end. I wanted to be sure to drop that stone for joys and concerns because part of what I'm talking about today is rituals and my increased awareness of how important they are, which this experience of preparing for this talk brought me to. Lost my page. Sometimes we set off to go somewhere and end up somewhere else. Unexpected opportunities or accidents or whatever change things. That's kind of what happened to me. My original idea for this talk came up a few months ago when I noticed something in common in two things I was studying. One was Joseph Campbell's work related to the hero with 1,000 faces. And the other was a book with the title, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. So this is Thomas Campbell's book, which I got from the library, which is too bad because I couldn't put notes in it. And this is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which this is, I think, the third time I've read it through. Probably the only book I've read 3 times. So the talk is really based on, the idea was to get those 2 books. I did indeed begin to write that talk. I may even get to some of it later. However, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. And I have a little piece of music I think illustrates this idea, so I can't resist. Let's see. I was there to take her money, steal her rings and run, but I fell in love with a lady, came away with none. Well, that's what happened to me. I was there to get stuff from these books, and I fell in love with something in the book that was quite different from what I planned to talk about. Reading The Hero with 1,000 Faces told me about something I thought was far more important than what I planned to talk about. That's what I'm going to present. If there is time left, I will present some of what I wrote for my original topic. I will now retitle my talk as My Understanding of the Function of Mythology According to Joseph Campbell. By the way, I actually met Joseph Campbell. I was in New York, and a man I worked with was on the board of some foundation, and they were doing a fundraiser, and their guest for the fundraiser was Joseph Campbell. And the man, my friend or associate, couldn't go and said, would I like to go? I said, oh, yes. So I went. It was a small cocktail party, about 30 people, including Joseph Campbell, who was a a small, demure man, very pleasant, in a suit and tie, not at all outwardly charismatic, just a nice person. And I talked to him for 5 or 6 minutes. I stopped him at the cocktail table and said something about my personal religious history, having grown up a Catholic and become a Unitarian at that point, and then a Quaker, and we discussed this, and he was quite open and talked about it, and just it was a nice conversation. I had no idea at that point how famous he really was, but now I have a whole different view. It seems to me that Joseph Campbell uses the term mythology to include all of the folk tales, stories, myths, and religions that have survived and passed on for many generations. Campbell states in his introduction to the book, "It is the purpose of the present book to uncover some of the truths disguised for us under the figures of religion and mythology." I read or skimmed Campbell's book looking for content that I could relate to the Kuhn book. Remember, the Kuhn book is about science, and this, of course, is not. Hard science, soft science. I found very little. I did have the interesting experience of constantly comparing a discussion related to science to one related to mythology. My brain got stretched trying to contact these two very different paradigms. Though I found next to nothing directly connecting the broad paradigms of science and mythology, I did find parts of Campbell's book particularly interesting. First, I want to mention his recurring discussion of the relationship between the content of mythology, the content of dreams, and psychoanalysis. His view is that mythology and dreams are coming from the same source.
Yes.
That source is part of the human psyche that is common to all humans, but for the most part, outside our conscious awareness. It seemed to me that Campbell believed that psychoanalysis, especially the works of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, made good use of that same source. In the introduction to his book, Campbell gave this quote from Sigmund Freud: "The truths contained in religious doctrines are, after all, so distorted and systematically disguised that the mass of humanity cannot recognize them as truth." The second idea that distracted me from my original plan was Campbell's view of the function that mythology can play in human culture, and the possible role that mythology can play in helping individuals seek and find the highest level of consciousness available to them in each stage of their life. I had been reading and sometimes scanning page after page of detailed recounting of particular myths from different cultures and different eras of history. That's what most of this book is. To be honest, I was not that interested. I could not relate them to Kuhn's book. I did not want to be entertained, and I found it difficult to relate them to my life. My perspective was changed when I read Campbell's view of the importance of myths to each individual in culture. Statements of these views did not just interest me, they stunned me. My immediate thought was along the lines of, this is good stuff. I would be better off presenting this in my lecture and leave out everything else. That's what I've done. While I was reading some of this powerful message, I would occasionally become aware that I was in the hands of a master magician being wrapped in a spell of his beliefs. Even knowing that, I could not help but think, this could be so. I'm going to be reading from his book frequently because I think he says better than I can some of these things. Mythology has been interpreted by the modern intellect as a primitive, fumbling effort to explain the world of nature, as a production of poetical fantasy from prehistoric times, misunderstood by succeeding ages, as a repository of allegorical instructions to shape the individual to his group. That was Durkheim. as a group dream, symptomatic of archetypal urges within the depths of the human psyche. Jung and Joseph Campbell, I think. Let me read that one again. As a group dream, symptomatic of archetypal urges within the depths of the human psyche. As a traditional vehicle of man's profoundest metaphysical insights, and as God's revelation to his children, that's the church. Mythology is all of these. The various judgments are determined by the viewpoints of the judges. For when scrutinized in terms not of what it is, but how it functions, of how it has served mankind in the past, of how it may serve today, mythology shows itself to be as amenable as life itself to the obsessions and requirements of the individuals, the race, the age. This was near the end of the book when I got to that. That's what started me thinking, oh, this is a good topic. Campbell states that the work of psychoanalysts shows that there can be little doubt that myths are of the nature of dreams, or that dreams are symptomatic of the dynamics of the psyche. There we go. According to this view, it appears that through the wonder tales, which pretend to describe the lives of legendary heroes, the powers of divinities of nature, the spirits of the dead, and the totem ancestors of the group, symbolic expression is given to the unconscious desires, fears, and tensions that underlie the conscious patterns of human behavior. Mythology, in other words, is psychology, misread as biography, misread as history, and misread as cosmology. So it's psychology, misread as history, cosmology, biography. The modern psychologist can translate it back to its proper denotations and thus rescue for the contemporary world its rich and eloquent document, a document of the profoundest depths of human character. Established here as in a fluoroscope, exhibited here as in a fluoroscope, stand to reveal the hidden processes of the enigma Homo sapiens. Occidental, Oriental, primitive, civilized, contemporary, archaic. The entire spectacle is before us. Mythology contains all of these. We have only to read it, study its constant patterns, analyze its variations, and therewith come to an understanding of the deep forces that have shaped man's destiny and must continue to determine both our private and our public lives. Though myths may have the same grammar and symbology as dreams, they differ in that their understood function is to serve as a powerful picture language for the communication of traditional wisdom. I read that to say the picture language, it's not speaking, mythology is not speaking to our conscious minds. It's speaking to this other part of us, the dream part, that he thinks psychoanalysts are getting in touch with. That's all. Okay. This is true already of the so-called primitive folk mythologies. The trans-susceptible shaman and the initiated antelope priest are not unsophisticated in the wisdom of the world, nor unskilled in the principles of communications by analogy. The metaphors by which they live and through which they operate have been brooded upon, searched, and discussed for centuries, even millenniums. They have served whole societies, furthermore, as the mainstays of thought and life. The culture patterns have been shaped to them. The youth have been educated and the aged rendered wise through the study, experience, and understanding of their effective initiatory forms. For they actually touch and bring into play the vital energies of the whole human psyche. They link the unconscious to the fields of practical action, not irrationally as in the manner of a neurotic projection, but in such fashion as to permit a mature and sobering practical comprehension of the fact world to play back as a stern control in the realms of infantile wish and fear. So mythology is a control system we are learning, and it speaks to us through symbols. And if this be true of the comparatively simple folk of mythologies, the systems of myth and ritual by which primitive hunting and fishing tribes support themselves, what may we say of such magnificent cosmic metaphors as those reflected in the great Homeric epics, the Divine Comedy of Dante, the Book of Genesis, and the timeless temples of the Orient? Until the most recent decades, these were the support of all human life and the inspiration of philosophy, poetry, and the arts. Where the inherited symbols have been touched by Lao Tzu, Buddha, Zoroaster, Christ, or Mohammed, employed by a consummate master of the spirit as a vehicle to the profoundest moral and metaphysical instructions, obviously we're in the presence rather of immense consciousness, more in the presence of immense consciousness than of darkness. So he's saying that the primitive tribal witch doctor was a master of a particular art of communication, and that we move forward into the modern era with people like Buddha. We're watching a supreme master at work on using these same tools. This is about the point where I began to say, hey, I think I'd rather talk about this than scientific revolutions. But can we apprehend this source, this raw energy of the universe? Can we be aware of its existence? We can't see the source, the raw energy of the universe, because our consciousness, our awareness, is a manifestation of that source. We can't use the glasses we are looking through. We see only what the glasses, we can't see the glasses we're looking through. We can only look through them. Campbell suggests we not only can't see this energy, we have difficulty even conceiving anything beyond our normal reality. And he goes on to say, our normal reality, which itself is a colorful, fluid, infinitely various, and bewildering phenomenal spectacle. So what we call reality is so varied and consuming, it's very hard to imagine anything else. But, and then he goes on to talk about, let's see, mythology. I was afraid this might happen. I'm looking for the function of mythology. There we go. The function of ritual and myth is to make possible and then to facilitate the jump by analogy, the jump to see that source. Forms and conceptions that the mind and its senses can comprehend are presented and arranged in such a way as to suggest a truth or openness beyond. And then the condition for meditation having been provided, the individual is left alone. Myth is but the penultimate. The ultimate is openness, that void or being beyond the categories, into which the mind must plunge alone and be dissolved. Therefore, God and the gods are only convenient means, themselves of the nature of the world of names and forms, though eloquent of and ultimately conducive to the ineffable. So words like God are just myth symbols speaking to our subconscious suggesting that which is far beyond what we call reality, the forms of everyday life. They are mere symbols to move and awaken the mind and to call it past themselves. So I found this just utterly enchanting, I guess, is the best way to put it. What now? How can the wisdom previously taught... Did I start this? Make sure my clock is doing what it's supposed to do. That can't be right. It says I have 1 minute left. I don't think that's right. Well, I probably should check every now and then the other clock in the back of the room to make sure I'm not... Oh, good. What now? How can the wisdom previously taught by mythology and religion, which is now seen as a pack of lies, be restored? There's wisdom there. Even if the vehicles through which it was coming, we now look at as, that's not true, that didn't happen, those aren't real. The entire, well, for many of us, for me especially, the Catholic Church I grew up in, I now see as a structure of lies, which makes it very hard to see its function. But he's saying, yeah, well, you just threw out the baby with the bath, which I'll say again later. Okay. The problem now is that of rendering the world spiritually significant. We need to make it possible for men and women to come to full human maturity through the conditions of contemporary life. His idea is that in the past, mythology, religion, all these stories speaking to us symbolically were doing that. They were making it possible for men and women to come to the full human maturity through the conditions of their lives. This is the point where I began to say, wait a second, do I really believe this? Haven't we moved on from that? And I think, well, he certainly makes a very persuasive case, but that doesn't mean he's right. A transmutation of the whole social order is necessary so that through every detail and act of secular life, the vitalizing image of the universal God-man, who is actually immanent and effective in all of us, may somehow be made known to consciousness. So he's saying our entire social structure has to change in order for each of us to reach the potential we have of knowing that of God, that we are God. Each of us know that. He calls it the God-man. Things have to change. And then I will mention the hero's journey in a minute. Let's see. The modern hero, the modern individual who dares to heed the call and seek the mansion of that presence with whom it is our whole destiny to be atoned, cannot, I think what he's saying to find the God within us, cannot indeed, must not wait for his community to cast off its slough of pride, fear, rationalized avarice, and sanctified misunderstanding. Wow. Every day I open the paper and I see a slough of pride, fear, rationalized avarice, and sanctified misunderstanding. Live, Nietzsche says, as though the day were here. It is not society that is to guide and save the creative hero, but precisely the reverse. And so every one of us shares the supreme ordeal, carries the cross of the Redeemer, not in the bright moments of his tribe's great victories, but in the silence of his personal despair. That caught me, it was unexpected, that personal despair. Looking at our political world, I got that. So that's the main message I wanted to deliver today. I'm just going to digress a little bit. because I have a little bit of time. But the other part what started me on this was the whole idea of paradigm shift, being born again, becoming someone who is different from who you used to be. And that was what was common between the structure of scientific revolutions and the hero's journey. In both cases, the person becomes someone quite different, and you can't go back. Once your vision shifts, you can never see it the way you used to see it. Frequently they mention that it's as if the world had changed. The world actually didn't change. You're just seeing a different world, a different aspect of it. So, how about the hero's journey? What does that have to do with us? Campbell says that we each have completed the hero's journey is a recurring myth in all cultures in all times. Mythology of the hero's journey you can find everywhere. Campbell says we have each completed many such journeys. The most obvious one is the journey from childhood to adulthood. We are born again. We are no longer who we thought we were. This is a challenging journey. It is a huge challenge to go from the transition from being a child, completely dependent, believing whatever you're told, to an adult, autonomous, making your own decisions, taking your responsibility. And yet we've made that. All of us have gone through the hero's journey. The hero's journey, typically you're called into it. You don't have a choice. You're in the middle of it. You are challenged, often greatly. And at the end, you receive a boon. That is the knowledge that changes your awareness. And the final part is you return to your community, to mankind, and you transmit it, you communicate it. That's all the hero's journey. The idea is that each of us have gone through at least one, but probably many journeys just like that. The one that occurred to me was at one point I was a father, a husband, an accepted member of the community. I had a clear role. And then within what seemed like a very brief time, I was a bachelor living alone in a new world. That was a paradigm shift. I no longer was who I thought I had been. Whether I ever was that doesn't matter. I certainly was not it anymore, and I certainly thought I was. So that's the hero's journey. The problem now is that of rendering the world spiritually significant. What now? How can the wisdom previously taught by I'll read this again. How can the wisdom previously taught by mythology and religion, which is now seen as a pack of lies, be restored? That's the hero's journey now. Personal growth can be viewed as slaying our inner demons. That's the mythology of slaying the dragon, which something like that occurs in almost every culture they've ever studied. It may not be a dragon, it may be a whale, it may be anything, but it is the monster. It's something in the subconscious. Those dragons, I read in this, are the unfinished business of our lives, that which is holding us back. And I have one reading. No, I'll give you that. Each of us has the opportunities for that personal growth. We need to only find them and have the courage to go on that journey. Here is a reading from Campbell's book related to the personal hero's journey. He was trying to communicate that psychoanalysis was dealing with the same stuff that mythology was, and he wanted to bring up, he brought up a particular bit of unfinished business that could occur in some people. Can't find where it starts. It has always been the prime function of mythology and rite to supply the symbols that carry the human spirit forward, in counteraction to those constant human fantasies that tend to tie it back. In fact, it may well be that the very high incidence of neuroticism among ourselves follows from the decline among us of such effective spiritual aid. In other words, the high level of neuroticism may be due to the fact that we have thrown away all the mythologies that had been dealing with some of them. We remain fixated to the unexercised images of our infancy and had hence declined to the necessary pastures of our adulthood. In the United States, there's even a pathos of inverted emphasis. The goal is not to grow old, but to remain young. Not to mature away from mother, but to cleave to her. And so, while husband, here's a statement that, if you want to reflect on it, might be a little bit troublesome. And so, while husbands are worshiping at their boyhood shrines, being the lawyers, merchants, or masterminds their parents wanted them to be, their wives, even after 14 years of marriage and 2 fine children produced and raised, are still on the search for love, which can come to them only from, paraphrases, myths and movie stars. So the idea that some of these unfinished businesses may restrict the ability of a man, in this case, to be fully mature and able to give what his wife needs is what he thinks, Joseph Campbell thinks, mythology in the past was supportive of. And by throwing away all of the mythology of religion and other stuff, we've thrown the baby out with the bath. All right, I've got one more thing to read, and then I will stop. When I was writing this last night, I couldn't find the quotes I wanted, so I thought, gee, what am I going to do? I said, well, I'll try and paraphrase it. So I thought it might be interesting to see. This is part, I'll just read a little part of it. Part of what I got from this. It is the role of mythology to give humans stories using symbols similar to those used in their dreams. These symbols speak to that part of their unconscious that is common to all humans in all cultures, since early in the era when consciousness began. These stories communicate the kind of psychological challenges that each person must deal with in the process of going from the newborn baby to old age and death. Mythology is a collection of the accumulated wisdom of the culture that created it. Similar myths occur in all cultures throughout history because the wisdom that can be gained from experience reflects that which is common to the lives of all humans at all times. These stories are told symbolically, both because these symbols can speak directly to the same part of us which dreams arise, and because the symbols can make the same statement in cultures that are radically different from one another. The Hopi Indian, the Eskimo, and the primitive African tribesman can all receive the wisdom of a bird stealing fire from a god, or slaying a monster that threatens one's family. Mythology is a repository of wisdom needed by each human in the process of realizing their potential. Though it may be communicated in folk tales or religious myth or by witch doctors, it is not the source or the vehicle used to transmit it, church, ghosts, stories, songs, that matters. It is the symbols and the way they relate to each other in the story that matters. And then I got a little carried away here. It is as if a teacher created a mock store to teach arithmetic. Over times, generations, the teaching process adds more and more detail to the store until the student believes the teacher is teaching them about stores, or even that they are in a real store. This is a lie. Or better stated, it is a myth. But the students are still learning arithmetic. They think that learning arithmetic is just an irrelevant byproduct of the process. So it is with mythology we call a traditional, so it is with the mythology we call a traditional religion. Just because it was misrepresented to us, housed in a corrupt structure, taught as often by hypocrites or sinners as by saints, does not mean its messages hidden in symbols, bypassing our consciousness, is not needed to us. We have become all hung up on the fact that we were asked to believe that dream symbols were real, that Mary was a virgin, that Christ died, that God brought him back to life. We now think those are lies and refuse to even read about them. I shouldn't say we. I now don't want to read about them because I was taught they were truth, reality. And now that I know and think that they are lies, I have trouble reading them. But there's the mythology behind them. They are myths that use symbols to give us insights we need in order to deal with life. Insights that bypass our conscious minds and speak to our subconscious. By undermining mythologies because they were misrepresented as reality, we have thrown the baby out with the bath. This ends my journey into paradigms of myths. And the structure of scientific revolutions will have to wait for another time.
Good.